career in construction offers you.
And for the next 2.5 years, the training for that career will be free. I guess we'll need a bit of a spend too in getting the message out there. Sadly, not everyone who this is aimed at is listening to my afternoon show.
No, that's right. And in fact, it's funny you say that, Jesse, because I've just basically pulled the pin on our kind of current PR and marketing program for the rest of the year to focus on getting this message out there and getting it, well known in the community, well shared across all of our apprentices and firms and to people beyond who we deal with to make sure that they're aware of these opportunities. And if the other people in the sectors do that as well, then hopefully we'll make sure that this money is well targeted and well spent. And we do have a ready and able workforce, when the recovery does happen, or people have been able to be redeployed into other jobs and not have to be, on the dole, basically.
And if you train all these young men and women up, will there be jobs for them in a year or two?
There will be, and if you look at our cycle over the last, 100 years, every boom is followed by a bust, and then every bust is followed by a bigger boom. And the fundamentals of the housing market, we think, haven't changed. We're just deferring the problem to another day. Over the next 2 or 3 years, we may not have the demand that we've currently got because people won't be wanting to build, they won't be wanting to upgrade because of their job security. But when that economy recovers, we often take off like a rocket, and then we really struggle to fill that shortfall. So if we can take those peaks and troughs off and get that continuity through, we're going to be much better off. So we're likely to have more people working in construction in 2 or 3 years' time than we do now. And the other important thing, if you talk to the economists and the people who look at the makeup of our sector, it's aging. We have a lot of people heading into retirement, the baby boomers over the next, 10 years, 5 to 10 years. It's not only new jobs, it's replacing the existing ones. And we already believe in the next 24 months we'll be at that point. So we need to keep the pipeline coming through.
You got your own curve to flatten, Warwick? Got to flatten the demand and supply curve for this for the labour market.
New Zealand's got a curve, it's a dip that's causing us problems in the next decade. Our birth rate 15 years ago was the lowest it's ever been. 2005, 2003, 2005 was our lowest ever birth rate. So we don't have the number of school leavers as we did as a percentage of our population today, 15 years on. That increases very slightly for the next 4 or 5 years, and then it collapses. So that if we don't address this problem over the next 4 or 5 years, if you think we've got a skill shortage now, you wait, it's going to be dire by the late 20s because we just don't have the population growth coming through internally. And that is a real problem facing all of New Zealand, not just our sector.
Warwick, sounds like you're doing a great job. Chief Executive of the Building and Construction Industry Training Organisation, Warwick Quinn. Thanks for your time today, and well done on getting this money, and good luck to putting it to good use.
Thanks very much.
1:28, we're due to hear from the Prime Minister any moment, so hopefully it won't be too short a chat with Matt Doran, federal political reporter at ABC, who joins us now to talk about the Trans-Tasman bubble. Hi there, Matt.
Good afternoon.
Is Australia safe to join at the moment? We've had 0 cases for 12 days here in New Zealand. What's your situation?
Well, the only cases that have been popping up over the last few days are what the health authorities here are describing as known cases, or cases where they know exactly where they've come from. And it's people that have returned from overseas who've gone into quarantine in hotels for a mandatory 2-week period. It's not necessarily any sort of community transmission, which is, of course, the big concern with this virus, regardless of country. So it does look like the situation has eased considerably here in Australia. There's very few people in hospitals, only one person, as per our last update from the federal government, on a ventilator. So things are certainly looking up here, and there are, of course, a number of states and territories which have recorded no cases for quite a few days, if not weeks now.
Nonetheless, your rate of community transmission or unknown transmission is relatively high, at 10% or something last time I saw. So is there confidence that the virus is on its way to being eliminated in Australia, or is there a thought that there might be pockets of it out there?
Well, those community transmission rates that you're speaking of, they do refer to these outbreaks that we've seen in places like nursing homes, So there's been a few nursing homes in Sydney in particular and in Victoria. So health authorities are describing them as somewhat closed-off environments. The virus has got in, but it's not necessarily then getting out. So I think that's where we're talking about that community transmission rate being high. It's a few anomalies in the statistics there, but certainly the message that's being put out there by federal health authorities and also state and territory health authorities is that this has been a remarkable achievement to try to, in such a big country, to try to keep the levels down.
Travelling to New Zealand might actually be step 2 for you, because I understand that you are yet to begin travelling freely between states. Has that happened yet, or is it far away?
This is the interesting point. The Prime Minister himself has started to say that it could be a possibility that Australians can travel to New Zealand before they can travel to certain parts of Australia. There are a number of states and territories that still have their borders closed. The only areas where there is free movement at the moment is between New South Wales, Victoria, and where I am here in the ACT.
Kia ora koutou katoa. As is now the custom before Cabinet makes a decision on moving down the alert level system, I'll set out in advance the details of what the next alert level looks like. And of course, this is following discussion by Cabinet members. It is our strong desire to get to level 1 as soon as is safe and possible. Within the last week, we removed restrictions on bars and increased the size gathering from 10 to 100. And by Monday, we'll have a good view on if that has led to any further cases, keeping in mind that 2-week cycle of transmission. If it hasn't, then we should be in a good position to move. Once we reach level 1, it will mean that all that hard work and sacrifice at alert levels 4, 3 and 2 by all New Zealanders has paid off. That our goal of breaking the chain of transmission and stopping community outbreak has been achieved for now. And it means lives have been saved, hospitals protected from overflow, and the job of economic recovery will be able to start faster. However, it does not mean our battle with the virus is over. COVID is still in the world, with over 100,000 new cases being reported daily, including in most of the countries we have close connections with. So at level 1, we all need to adopt new behaviours in order to keep any future cases of COVID under control, particularly public health measures like hand hygiene to reduce the risk of transmission if cases pop up, and enhanced contact tracing. We also, and this is key, need to maintain strict border measures. Let me be clear, the only reason we are in the enviable position of being even able to consider a move to alert level 1 is because of our strict border controls. So at level 1, that is a place where we transition from physical distancing restrictions being our number 1 defence against the virus to our borders. Public health, our number 1 defence against the virus being our borders, to public health and cough etiquette, and ramped up contact tracing as our ongoing wall of defence. Therefore, at level 1, all current rules and restrictions on businesses and services are essentially lifted. All the rules for hospitality, such as single service, separated tables and people being seated, all end. There is no requirement for physical distancing in workplaces and in public places. All gatherings of any size can occur. However, we are working with ticketing agencies and large-scale event organisers on a COVID code, whereby contact details are collected so that we can keep a track of people at large gatherings. In the event we need to follow them up for contact tracing. We see this as being an industry code, a voluntary one we work together with industry who work in large events on in order to better support and facilitate future contact tracing if it's required. Our churches will be able to return to full service. Our sports and concert stadiums can be sold out, and we can celebrate and we can mourn with one another in groups of any size. Community sport can start without size and distancing restrictions, or physical separation on planes and public transport will no longer need to be in place. But while these restrictions will end when we're in the situation of moving to alert level 1, we do need new behaviours to start. In the event of a future case, it will be critical we can rapidly contact trace cases. That will still remain. The government has invested significantly in improving our contact tracing system, and a dedicated committee chaired by Sir Brian Roche is overseeing the implementation of that work. But we do want to see ongoing use of digital diaries, and I'll have a bit more to say about that on Monday. The ability to rapidly contact trace is one of the key things we can all do individually to help us stay in level 1 in the event of new cases, rather than having to move back through restrictions at different alert levels. So here are the golden rules of level 1 for keeping the virus at bay. 1, if you're sick, stay home. Don't go to work or school, don't socialise. None of that changes when we lift restrictions. We do not want New Zealanders to be stoic and go into workplaces or anywhere else if they're sick. Please still stay home if you're unwell. 2, if you have cold or flu-like symptoms, call your doctor or healthline and make sure you get tested. 3, wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands. 4, sneeze and cough into your elbow and regularly disinfect shared surfaces. 5, if you're told by health authorities to self-isolate, you must do so immediately. 6, if you're concerned about your well-being or you've got underlying health conditions, we still encourage you to work with your GP to understand how best to stay healthy. 7, keep track of where you've been and who you've seen to help contact tracing if needed. We really encourage people to use the NZ COVID Tracer app as a handy and easy way to do that. 8, businesses should help people keep track of their movements by displaying the Ministry of Health QR code for contact tracing. 9, stay vigilant. There is still a global pandemic going on. People and businesses should be prepared to act fast to step up alert levels if we have to. And finally, 10, people will have had very different experiences over the past couple of months. Whatever you're feeling, it's okay. Be kind to others and be kind to yourself. Ultimately, level 1 represents us getting the virus under control, but the war doesn't end so long as COVID is still around the world, and the economic damage caused by it is ongoing. We need to stick to level 2 rules for now. We need to stay united, and when we get to level 1, appreciate the freedoms it offers while putting in place new behaviours that means we don't have to go backwards again. None of us want to return to where we have been. I'm now happy to take questions.
Minister, why are you waiting until the Cabinet decision on Monday? Why can we not move tomorrow?
Yeah, look, for the same reasons, we've always moved cautiously through the different alert levels. The worst thing we can do for the economy is go backwards. So we do want to make sure that we've spent enough time at this level where we now have large gatherings of people. We now have much more intermingling, much more contact with one another. Keep in mind that in terms of the timeframes, that even on the 8th of June, we will have only spent 2 weeks with gatherings of 100. We will have only spent 4 weeks, roughly, at alert level 2 as a whole. And that has been the time frame we've tended to allow to make sure that we don't have those ongoing cases. The final thing to just keep in mind, asymptomatic transmission is an issue with COVID, people being sick and not knowing it. There is a long tail for COVID. We've had some people who've tested positive after 5 weeks. Those are all reasons for us to balance listening to the science, but also opening up as soon as we can.
Prime Minister, how can
Barry.
you advocate social distancing at the moment when photographs have been published of you over the weekend embracing people in restaurants?
I don't think that's a fair description.
Description of
I have not embraced. In fact, I've been in situations where I've had to awkwardly say I cannot.
people.
And Barry, I will absolutely acknowledge, I will continue to advocate social distancing. Yes, there have been scenarios where I have had people get closer than would have been advised. If I could just finish the question. I have had situations where people have moved into photos with me closer than I would have liked. But I will continue to advocate for social distancing, and I will continue to do my best in those situations to step away from people. Often hard when people come in right alongside you and when they are young people and sometimes children.
Are you breaking your own rules?
Oh, again, social distancing is still important. It is still something that I am advocating. There will be the odd occasion when I haven't managed to sidestep quickly enough, or I have been in a situation I've had people come alongside. But it is something I continually remind when I'm out and about as well.
Have you received any advice on the likelihood
any forecasts around the potential of a second wave?
That is an ongoing potential for anyone in the world who is easing restrictions. You know, the last time I was on a call with other world leaders, the likes of Austria, the likes of Norway, Greece, Australia, we were all discussing the concerns of the second wave. And that's not based on nothing, that is based on seeing other countries experience that. We have had places that have had COVID-free days and then seen the return of cases. So whilst it's hard to model, there are some risks that exist for New Zealand. One is the fact that we're moving into winter, and that does present risk, and asymptomatic transmission. That's why we are working to move cautiously, but with confidence.
How concerned are you that New Zealanders may be becoming too relaxed?
And that is why we will only make a decision to move when we feel like we have enough confidence to move, and to be able to stand and say to New Zealanders, now is the time we can start lifting some of these restrictions. We will always be taking that balanced approach between listening to the science, but also making sure that when we are safe to do so, we open up the economy. And we've done that all the way through. We will still ask New Zealanders, though, to keep some of the basics. Keep washing your hands. Keep staying home if you're sick. Get a test if you're unwell.
If border restrictions are going to stay in place indefinitely, will there be a move to make the business exemptions more transparent, just to deal with some of that frustration?
Oh, yeah, look, as I said yesterday, the proportion of people coming in under the business exemption is very small relative to the number coming in under humanitarian. So we're talking 150 under the economic exemption, roughly 2,000 under the humanitarian. So obviously our priority has been the unification of families, of partners, of loved ones. However, we've also had some businesses that essentially just stop if they're unable to access particular people. We are going to keep checking those settings though, because I absolutely understand that for someone who is struggling to get in, that will be their first thought. Why them and not me? So that is something that we will keep working on.
You mentioned about the crowds as well.
I'll come to you then, Jessica.
So in terms of the crowds and sporting events, obviously we're going to go from 100 to tens of thousands of people in the same space. What feedback have you had from the sporting industry about how ready they are to ramp up that quickly?
Well, and this is where actually, regardless of the reason people are coming together, for those larger events, it is a matter of preparedness for us. We may be confident that we're in an environment where we do not have COVID in circulation, but if we have a situation where even one case emerges and it's found that they have been in attendance at a large event, we always have to be prepared to be able to contact trace successfully, which is why we want to work alongside those who put on events, large-scale sporting events, music events, work with ticketing agencies, so they do have information available for short periods of time to help us with contact tracing.
The government has given an exemption to Avatar because of COVID-19. Will you look at doing...
To a group of individuals for Avatar, so it's not that suddenly there's a carte blanche exemption for the entire production. That is not the case.
Sorry, I didn't mean to imply that.
No.
In terms of the America's Cup as well, where are we at with the exemption that they've been calling?
So the process that this goes through is that the application goes to MB. They will then make a judgment and determine whether or not an application should go to the Minister for consideration. My recollection is that roughly 10% make it to that point. A number are being rejected. My understanding is no decision has been made when it comes to the America's Cup, but it's one of many where people are seeking exemptions because they are essentially unable to operate without the ability to travel.
So the government's got it, and it's now...
You would need to check with Minister Twyford where exactly it is in the system. Ben?
That's the heart of my question as well. I think we can all agree the humanitarian entrants are a good thing, but we don't have any idea about what the criteria are. No one can point to that on any public website anywhere. You didn't announce this scheme. It's totally discretionary up to the minister.
Oh, no, there is criteria that the minister is using, and I'm sure he would be very happy to speak to it. But it is linked to... Ben, if I could just finish. There is no issue there with sharing some of that criteria, but there is always a level of which you're having to make a judgment. But it is around the impact of a particular individual having an impact on infrastructure, for instance, wider economic impacts through jobs, for instance, no longer being able to operate as a catalyst for one person not being able to be here. So there is a set, I'm trying to remember how many it is, but it's a handful of set of criteria that is used for those cases. But Minister Twyford can speak to you in more detail about those. To give you a bit of an example, we had a case of someone who basically had special skills and knowledge in repairing a chairlift that no one else could repair. We had wastewater infrastructure that was specialised that no one else could repair except an offshore technician. We've had, from memory, some in the aviation industry from memory. So they're often specialist knowledge or skill that we can't access here, or someone who, if they're not here, possibly hundreds or thousands of jobs are affected. Yeah, coming in the front.
Can you elaborate what that means for tangihanga and funeral?
For level 1, there is no restriction then on the number of people who can attend tangihanga and funeral, or no requirement on anyone to behave in a particular way with social distancing. So it essentially means a return to normal for tangihanga.
In terms of those border exemptions, how many more do you anticipate we will get for business purposes in sort of weeks and months to come?
Look, I imagine that we are not the only country in the world who are facing this. Anyone with border restrictions is facing the issue of how do you prioritise and determine who is able to come in when you've got a restricted environment of how many you can successfully quarantine. We have obviously, in terms of numbers, really prioritised people being reunified with their family and with their loved ones. But we've also had to make sure there was an avenue for those areas where actually we would see hundreds potentially of job losses or critical infrastructure grind to a halt. So trying to make sure that you have fairness across those two very different reasons for coming in is something that the whole, a number of countries are facing.
Do you expect that to go from a matter of a couple of hundred to thousands or to several hundred? What can we expect?
Yeah, well, look, in some cases they are sectors who want long access to labour, an offshore labour market. And there, actually, they are very unlikely to meet the criteria that we have set. Because, of course, what we also need to do is make sure that those who are unemployed within New Zealand can access work. And so that's where it's a matter we might be able to deal with some of the demand from those sectors by actually working alongside closely with them to match skills within New Zealand to those jobs. But that I do expect we will continue to see that grow, because actually there are a number of specialised areas where those expertise actually do sit offshore. It'll be individuals often who come in for a short period of time to do a job and then leave. So we will continue to need a mechanism for that. Audrey?
Can you clarify the rules for music venues and concerts? So is it like any number of people and they don't have to be seated, you just have to be able to trace that they could be one of thousands who
Yes, so this is where we want to do a bit of work with the sector, because actually I've already had a number of conversations with some of those who work in this space, particularly music, because of my portfolio of arts, culture and heritage. And they indicated, even before we were considering the Alert Level 1 settings or a move to them, that they were already working on their own protocols to make sure that they were improving hygiene practice, improving their ability to contact trace if they needed to, which is why we've come up with the work around a code. We want to make sure that we're supporting the industry to embed safe practice as an ongoing way of operating for the future. And that means also having the ability to contact trace. You'll recall that that is one of the issues that came up early on when we had someone at a tool conference.
How can you contact trace somebody in a mosh pit, for example?
Well, keeping in mind, Barry, that of course, is significant for Mount Smart Stadium, for instance. Often, you will still have people seated all the way up to the edges of an area where people may be able to congregate. So the vast majority of people in that environment are still seated and ticketed. So there is a degree where actually you will have a group that won't be able to with as much precision, but a large number will. Yep.
On a different topic, have you considered using diplomatic channels to raise human rights issues with the United States administration over what's happened in the last week or so?
That isn't something that I have directly sought out, but when asked, I am obviously more than willing to put my very firm view on what we have all witnessed from afar. And I've already said it was a horrific act and that in New Zealand I pride ourselves on being a country that calls out and responds when we see acts of racism and intolerance, but my job is to make sure that we do that within our own borders and make sure that we always acknowledge that we are not a nation of perfection here either.
Next time, when these sort of international meetings resume, would you raise it with a US representative in the way that New Zealand has done in the past with countries like Indonesia when there are, obvious human rights transgressions?
Yeah, and look, I've seen some countries have raised, for instance, the treatment of journalists, particularly when their own journalists have been involved, so they've had that direct link.
African American citizens of the United States, specifically them, would you raise human rights concerns as it relates to that population?
Look, so let me, Thomas, be really clear. I'm very rarely do I rule in or out the kinds of conversations I have with leaders because they are often topical, they are often wide-ranging. I've discussed, for instance, with President Trump before the issue of gun control and our view on gun control. But again, I have no set time frame when I will next see him, so I cannot tell you the kinds of nature of the things that I would discuss with him. But if you ask me now for a view on what I've seen, I have shared it and I will very openly share it.
To the point,
Jackson.
It is a...
Sorry, you were either doing bunny ears or you were asking a question,
No, I'm
Jackson.
asking a question. I was letting Thomas finish.
Thomas, no, Jackson,
has
far
has
away.
the government received the draft blueprint that outlines how Trans-Tasman travel should safely resume?
I have seen the work that's been done by the Australian-New Zealand joint leadership team from, led by Adrian Littlewood. So I have seen that work. Is that what you're referring to?
I was under the impression both governments were set to receive a draft blueprint in early June.
Well, we are still obviously doing collaborative work together. We're preparing respective papers for consideration by our own cabinets, and so that's still work in train. But in the meantime, I have seen the ANZLF blueprint and proposals. Yeah, we'll just finish up in the middle here.
A review of Minister Twyford said that you were considering a review of the current border restrictions, and has it gone to cabinet yet?
A review of potential border restrictions. No, but keeping in mind they are across a number of areas, checking in on the economic exemptions, ongoing work to bring in family and loved ones, and just our ongoing capacity issues, because we are constrained as to how many we can manage at a time. Yep, and last question out of the back.
Are you planning sort of any public events or anything for Alert Level 1?
None that I can talk about at this stage. There have been things that haven't been able to occur since lockdown that were scheduled that were in that frame, but I'll probably, once we've got a bit more of a clear guide on how we're going to roll them out and the dates, I'll come back to you, but they tend to sit in the Ministry of Arts, Culture and Heritage frame. Okay, thanks everyone.
Oh, thanks.